Senate Republican leader Bob Huff said he used to support term limits, but along the way, before I came up here, I decided we may have made a mistake on that because we do tend to dumb down the institution. Just this past summer, California amended the term limit statute. We reduced the consecutive 14-year term to 12-year term so that politicians can serve in one house for up to 12 years rather than having to split it between Assembly and Senate. What are your feelings on term limits, and should any further changes be made to the statute or to other areas of the law to help the legislature work better?
That's a very good question. On the area of term limits, one of the things that I think that people do not understand is that when there are term limits, it tends to give a disproportionate influence on what's called the third house or special interest legislation. Because when there's term limits, there tends to be a lot more people coming into office, and the lobbyists who know the system, who've been around for a long time, have more sway over these new people who are coming in. And that is one of the disadvantages of term limits. But by the same term, one of the advantages of term limits is that you're bringing new ideas, bringing new people in. And the people of California have spoken, and they feel like term limits is an important thing. They've seen so much abuse, and as such, I think it is important that we listen to the people. The people want a rotation of who's in there representing them. The people just need to be aware of there is that third house that has been there a long time, and that third house does have a lot of control in the state. And as much as we have term limits, we need to be looking at ways that we can temper the effect that special interest legislation has on the state of California, because people who are elected are being elected to represent the people. And they need to remember that they are there for the people, to help the people, and to help the state. And that is the important thing that we need to be taking away as legislators, is that we are there to serve the people.
Yeah, I would agree with Bob, Senator Huff. I philosophically actually sort of agree with, or I do agree with term limits. I think it's good for us as individuals to go places and learn and commit ourselves, but sometimes it's good to move on as well. But the way we constructed term limits in California is really sort of idiotic, and the change is going to be a big help, I believe. So the way we constructed it is you get 3 2-year terms in the Assembly and 2 4-year terms in the Senate. You could have a total of 14 years. This is for current members that I am under. And so that's 14 years. The average life expectancy of a member of the legislature before we passed term limits was 14 years. So the particularly problematic part is the 3 2-year terms in the Assembly. When I was a member of the Board of Supervisors, Contra Costa is the 9th largest county in the state. I felt like it took me 6 years to understand that budget of a little over $1 billion in those times, just to comprehend it in the way that I comprehended a restaurant's budget. So to try to do that in 6 years in the legislature is exactly when you get termed out. So we're losing terrific members in what would be my class this year. Both Republican members. Paul Cook's a good friend from the Inland Empire, a former Marine. Lots of good friends on the Democratic side. Just as they start to hit their stride, they're termed out of office. So the construction was bad. So the change to 12 years in either house I think will be particularly helpful, particularly for the Assembly. We're going to turn over 40% of the 120 members of the California State Legislature, the second most important legislative body arguably in the country this year. You just can't understand the complexities of a state this size, its budget, its operations in 2 to 6 years. So it's a good thing. I think the best form of term limits would be really good campaigns and robust campaigns with knowledgeable voters who understand and engage, much like most of the people here, the fact that you're here. That's the way American democracy is supposed to work. Am I up?
Yeah. He did not want to hear that, though.
That's perfect form of turbulence. We should do that for how long we can talk every day.
Maybe the legislature should introduce that.
That's right. Thing in our neck.
All right, turning to another critical issue in California, pensions. Public employee pension costs are forcing a reduction in services throughout the state and have been cited as a factor in recent municipal bankruptcy filings. What do you think should be done to curb rising pension costs?
Well, we passed a comprehensive bill that the governor was the leader of this year. It would do away with a lot of things you've read in the Contra Costa Times that Lisa's colleague Dan Bornstein's written about, spiking, using airtime. So those would be eliminated both for state employees but also county employees. In Contra Costa County we're what's called a 37 Act county, so they have their own retirement. It's been particularly egregious in this county. Some of the concerns, and you've read about it, the Moraga Orinda Fire District and the San Ramon Fire District, where we had fire chiefs actually leaving and getting compensated more as retirees than they did as employees. So that will no longer be allowed anywhere in the state. It set a cap on how much you could get, so when you read about $200,000 or $300,000, I believe the cap was $150,000 with a little sliding scale depending on what your compensation was. So those are good things. Having said all that, CalPERS, the largest public employees retirement fund in the country, the one that most of the cities are in Contra Costa and in Alameda, says that this will help with our unfunded liability from 20 to 30%. So there's a lot more to be done. Most of that needs to be done at the bargaining table because the U.S. Supreme Court has said that we can't go back in and break a contract under the contract provision of the Constitution and renege on those contracts. So the best way to, I think, to remedy that is to do what literally hundreds of local agencies have done and the state's done, is to go in and change the compensation payments. One of the big parts of the pension reform was that everybody has to have skin in the game. So under the new laws, the employee has to pay at least 50% as the employer does. And then lastly, you're getting ready to turn that thing up. Our investments haven't returned like everything has, and that's been a real problem.
This is a very good question, and it is a very important question for California. However, I'm going to have to stringently object with my opponent. This pension reform that just came through, to say it was a Band-Aid on gangrene is an insult to the Band-Aid. The 1999, the Republicans, the Democrats, they voted to expand the benefits. They made it retroactive. We had hardly any unfunded liability in 1999. Now we are at $500 billion of unfunded liability. A lot of the things that were implemented in this plan are not going to take place for 30 years with the employees who are hired after January 1st. I believe my opponent misspoke when he said the United States Supreme Court. I believe he meant to say it was the California Supreme Court. California is one of the only states that it does not allow us to change pensions on future benefits of current employees. We do need to make a constitutional amendment to our California Constitution to change that, because we are one of the few states in the union on that issue. There are plenty of things that we could do and we need to do. I mean, why we have retirement ages at 57 instead of 67 like Social Security. I mean, the list is endless of all the things we could do. We can consider putting caps on it so that when certain people get to, like, let's say $100,000 in pensions, they have to shift to some kind of 401k system. But private business over 20 years ago went away from pensions, and we need to consider moving towards a system that will last.
Right.